And tonight we're having our Bible study to finish up our study on Gideon from Judges 6, 7, and 8. And we're going to do chapter 8. So we hope that what we say blesses everybody that hears it, and that it helps us to be reminded of things that God has done. He is so good to us. Even when we make mistakes, He takes a lot of our mistakes and makes something beneficial out of it. So I trust y'all got to enjoy at least part of this beautiful day that we had today. That was awesome. Here it is in November, and we're still having, well, we have several seasons in one day. You have like a fall or winter season in the morning, and then it warms up for a little while, almost like spring, and then it goes back to being cold again. So the key is layers. When you get hot, you peel them off. When you get cold, you put them back on. So, all right. If y'all would turn to Judges chapter 8. In 6 and 7, this is kind of a short summary. There's a lot more to it than what I'm going to say, but God chose Gideon to fight, to be the leader of the Israelites, to fight the enemies, such as the Midianites, and then there were some other ones too. So he was chose to lead the Israelite army. And I just think this is a very awesome story, because we find out at first Gideon's a little bit like Moses. He didn't have the confidence in God that he should have had, and he didn't have the confidence in himself that he should have had. And we don't need confidence so much in ourselves as we need confidence in God, that He can help us do whatever we need to do. Our confidence needs to be in God. So, anyway, through several different events, he was able to understand that it was God's will for him to be the leader, and that if God wanted him to be the leader, God would help him do it. So he started out with 32,000 soldiers. Now, that sounds like a lot of soldiers, but if I read the scriptures correctly, and we studied chapter 6 and 7, it sounded like there were more enemies than there were Israelites. Soldiers. My tongue's tied. Anyway, so you would have thought that would be enough, but God wanted to change the scenario, because that was enough to where if they won, it would be real easy for them to take the credit for their victory, even though there was still less of them than there was of the enemy. So he told Gideon to send 10,000 of them, I believe it was. Well, let's see here. Anyway, he sent a large amount back home of men that said they were afraid to fight. and he wanted bold soldiers, so he sent a bunch of them home, and then he sent a bunch more home that were not being watchful when they drank water from the river, and he wanted alert and watchful men who were bold. So he sent a whole bunch more home. Anyway, the army went from 32,000 to only 300 to go against an army of enemies that were bigger than their original army was, the Israelite original army. And so anyway, they did, they obeyed God and ended up with 300 men. And then with his own mouth, Gideon was going to declare that that they would win the victory. And he calls, let's see, and I didn't write down where exactly it was. Anyway, they did get the victory with 300, but they never had to raise a sword, because God had them put a trumpet in one hand, and they were to blow the trumpet when they were told. And when, in the other hand, he had clay pots or pitchers that had little torches in them. And when they were told, they were to bust it, so that both of their hands were occupied. There was no hand for a sword. And there's a place in, I should have written it down, but there's a place in here where, here it is. It's Judges chapter 7, verse 20. It says, the sword for the Lord and Gideon. Now, I never gave it any thought before, but what he's saying is God is behind Gideon, and God is going to be their sword. They don't need the natural sword to win this battle. And so that's kind of interesting in itself. But anyway, they did what they were told, and when they did, they all at the same time blew a loud noise with the trumpet, and then they smashed their pots, which made a lot more noise, and then the torches with them being on fire when were inside of the pitchers, if I understood, of clay. And anyway, when you have something like that and you break the holder, it makes the flames shoot out. So it caused the other army to believe, with all that noise and all that ruckus and all those fires shooting out, because he had the army surround the enemy army. The Israelites surrounded him. And so they thought the army was bigger than it was. And it scared them. And they were so frightened and so confused that basically they had a riot and killed each other. Now, there were some other armies round about nearby, and then there was a few, I guess, that escaped this battle and started running in a different direction. But anyway, they won that battle without using any natural sword, and God was given all the glory for it. So we're going to go to chapter 8 and just find out what happened after that. And so I'm going to ask Dave to read in the King James Version, and Josie to read the same verses after Dave in her Living Word Bible, and I'm going to read the Amplified version of the story. And we're going to start with verses 1 through 3. Mr. Dave, you want to start off, please? We can't hear you for some reason. pause for technical difficulties. Is it a battery thing or something else? Okay. That was a good idea to redeem the time. Josie's going to read it out of the Living Word first.
But the tribal leaders of Ephraim were violently angry with Gideon. Why didn't you send for us when you first went out to fight the Midianites? They demanded. But Gideon replied, God let you capture Oreb and Zeb, the generals of the army of Midian. What have I done in comparison with that? Your actions at the end of the battle were more important than ours at the beginning, so they calmed down.
Okay. Are you ready, Dave? You want me to go on ahead? It's still not working. Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and read it in the Amplified. We may be just doing the Living Bible and Amplified tonight if our technical stuff isn't quite right. All right, and the men of Ephraim said to Gideon, why have you treated us like this, not calling us when you went to fight with Midian? And they quarreled with him furiously. And he said to them, what have I done now in comparison with you? Is not the gleaning of the grapes of your big tribe of Ephraim better than the vintage of my little clan of Abiezer? God has given into your hands the princes of Midian, Oreb, and Zeb. And what was I able to do in comparison with you? Then their anger towards him was abated when he had said that. Now we're ready to find out if Dave's equipment up there is going to cooperate or not.
Verse 1.
Yes.
And the men of Ephraim said unto him, why hast thou served us thus, that thou callest us not when thou wentest to fight with the Midianites? And they did chide with him sharply. And he said unto them, what have I done now in comparison of you? Is not the gleaning of the grapes of Ephraim better than the vintage of Abiezer? God hath delivered into your hands the princes of Midian, Oreb and Zeb. And what was I able to do in comparison of you? Then their anger was abated toward him when he had said that.
Okay. What comments can y'all think of? Or did you learn anything, or anything in particular stands out to you? Well, what I noticed was it sounds to me like the men of Ephraim didn't like being left out of the battle, even though they had done better things and bigger things than what Gideon. There was a little bit of jealousy going on there, and they didn't like that. But now if they had been included in the battle, God wouldn't have gotten the victory because there would have been more than 300 men to win it, you know. But anyway, they felt like they left out on the excitement, got left out, and they were upset, is what it sounds like to me. But Gideon appeased them by mentioning things that they had done that the men of Ephraim had done that Gideon's group didn't get to have a part of. So that seemed to appease them, and they felt better because I guess they thought they were going to be left out on getting the glory or something. I don't know, but anyway, anybody else got a different slant to that?
Well, I'm sure there's something to do with the number 300 and why God only wanted those that were looking around instead of just burying their face in the water, so. But then again, maybe there was only 300 of those pots.
There's a thought I had never thought of. Oh, and it didn't sound like he gave any forewarning of how he was going to do the battle. Gideon was just expected to obey as they went, didn't it? Josie, you got any comment? Okay, that's good enough for her. All right, let's read verses 4 through 7. Dave, you want to go first, or do you want to go first, Josie?
I'll go.
Okay.
And Gideon came to Jordan and passed over, he and the 300 men that were with him, faint yet pursuing them. And he said unto the men of Succoth, Give, I pray you, loaves of bread unto the people that follow me, for they be faint, and I am pursuing after Zebah and Zalmunna, kings of Midian. And the princes of Succoth said, In the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna, now in thine hand, that we should give bread unto thine army. And Gideon said, Therefore when the Lord hath delivered Zebah and Zalmunna unto mine hand, then I will tear your flesh with the thorns of the bitterness of with briars.
Okay, Josie.
Gideon now crossed the Jordan River with his 300 men. They were very tired, but still chasing the enemy. He asked the men of Succoth for food. We are weary from chasing after Zebah and Zabbalah, the kings of Midian, he said. But the leaders of Succoth replied, You haven't caught them yet. If we feed you and you fail, they'll return and destroy us. Then Gideon warned them, When the Lord has delivered them to us, I will return and tear your flesh with the thorns and briars of the wilderness.
Okay, thank you. And Gideon came to Jordan and passed over, he and the 300 men with him, faint yet pursuing. And he said to the men of Succoth, Give, I pray you, loaves of bread to the people who follow me, for they are faint, and I'm pursuing Zebah and Zalmunna, kings of Midian. And the princes of Succoth said, Are Zebah and Zalmunna already in your hand, that we should give bread to your army? And Gideon said, For that, when the Lord has delivered Zebah and Zalmunna into my hand, I will thresh your flesh with the thorns and briars of the wilderness. Wow. He hasn't had much cooperation, has he, from the different armies that were supposed to be on his side? I mean, they didn't seem to care that the men were tired and hungry, and that eating a little something would help refresh them and get them perked up, did they? But Gideon let them know that his army, because of it being for the Lord was going to cause them to have victory over these other tribes, and in spite of the fact that this particular group refused to feed his group. And he was not happy about it, as you can tell by his response.
If they were just eating bread, I guess they were awful skinny and weak.
Well, after doing all that fighting, you need to have some meat probably to give you some energy, a second wind, so to speak. You need some refreshment of some sort. You got any input, Mr. Dave? You usually have some pretty good comments.
Well, just like the first one there, God knew that they were going to complain when there was only 300 pots, jars. So what are you going to do with all these extra people when all you have is what God knew that they already had something to begin with? If it was just 300 of those jars, what are those other people going to do? Are they going to start complaining and messing up the whole plan? And you never know.
Well, they could have got mixed up and started killing them instead of the enemy couldn't see very well, so I guess he wanted all of them to be able to see with the lights they had, maybe.
Well, what I get out of these verses here, the men of Succoth didn't realize that they were a team too. It's just that instead of being in a battle, they were to help refresh the army and feed them. It's a team effort. It's like on these relays, you usually have posts at certain on races and stuff that people run. They usually have stations where you stop for a minute and you get a drink of water, maybe go to the restroom, and if necessary, get a small bite to eat. Nothing major, but just a little bit to refresh you to continue your race. And it's a team effort. Not everybody is actually in the race. And Succoth was given an opportunity to be a partner in helping. But they didn't like the way they were being told to help. So they're not recognizing that God's in charge. Not they. They are not in charge. And anyway, he let them know that God was going to help them win even if they didn't have any refreshing. But those who were given the opportunity to help would suffer consequences. That's what it seemed like to me.
There's a strategy in war also that you don't use everybody to do something. It's, you use a number in one battle, and then you have some reserves somewhere else to trap the ones that are fleeing and different things like that. So you don't use everybody and throw them all in there at one time. It's what they do throughout history, wars throughout history.
Well, even in like football games and different games like that, competitive sports that are teams against one another, the whole team doesn't fight at the very beginning usually. I've never heard of them unless they were a really, really small team. But what they do is, like you said, they have some reserves, and at certain points when they notice that there's some weariness going on with some of the players, they let some of the ones that they had held back go into the game, and they pull the ones that are worn out or whatever, and in the army, I think that's what you described as something similar. You don't. Well, it's like that little old Aesop's story about the rabbit and the turtle, the race and stuff. If you give it all that you've got at the beginning, you have nothing left for the middle and the end. And so, to me, that's kind of, it's changing people in the wars and in the ball games, but sometimes it's taking the same people and giving them a little bit of a break to refresh them to where they can have renewed strength. Anyway, that's kind of what I get out of that. But this Succoth, he's acting like somebody who's jealous, in my way of thinking. Jealous because he wasn't picked to do what Gideon did. All right. Any other comments before we move on? I think we've had some pretty good comments. And I hadn't thought of the ones that Dave mentioned. I think that's awesome. All right. Well, Dave, if you would, 8 and 9.
And he went up thus to Penuel, and spake unto them likewise, and the men of Penuel answered him as the men of Succoth had answered him. And he spake also unto the men of Penuel, saying, When I come again in peace, I will break down his towers. Now, did you say 9?
Well, I did, but going ahead and read through to 11. Or through 11.
Verse 9, And he spake also unto the men of Penuel, saying, When I come again in peace, I will break down this tower. Now Zebah and Zalmunna were in Karkor, and their host with them, about 15,000 men, all that were left of all the host of the children of the east. For there fell 120,000 men that drew sword. And Gideon went up by the way of them that dwelt in tents on the east of Nobah and Jebhabah,
Close enough.
and smote the host, for the host was secure.
Okay, Josie, 8 through 11, please.
Then he went up to Peniel and asked for food there, but got the same answer. And he said to them also, When this is all over, I will return and break down this tower. By the time King Zebah and King Zalmunna, with a remnant of 15,000 troops, were in Canaan, there was all that was left of the allied alien armies of the east, for 120,000 and had already been killed. Then Gideon circled around by the caravan route east of Nobah and Jogmahah, striking at the Midianite army in surprise raids.
Okay. And he went from there up to Penuel and made the same request. And the men of Penuel answered him as the men of Succoth had. And Gideon said to the men of Penuel, When I come again in peace, I will break down this tower. Now Zebah and Zalmunna were in Karkor with their army, which was about 15,000 men, all who were left of all the army of the sons of the east, for there had fallen 120,000 men who drew the sword. And Gideon went up by the route of those who dwelt in tents east of Nobah and Jobahah, and smote their camp unexpectedly, for the army thought itself secure. Any comments? It makes me think of David when he was fighting Goliath, how his brothers made fun of him for they thought he was just came to spy on what they were doing, and then he ends up being chosen of God to defeat Goliath. Well, these armies were bigger. I mean, it's just astounding how people can get rebellious just because they didn't get the important, what in their mind, job to do. If God told you to do it, it's important. Even if you think it's meager, even if you think it's small, your job is important. But they weren't looking at it that way. And so it almost seems like they refused to feed these guys because they hadn't quite won over everybody yet. And here these guys were a small group compared to the rest of them. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So it was just, to me, it was just reactions being jealous of the smaller group accomplishing so much And in their natural eye, that meant they got a lot of glory, and they didn't like that. And so they didn't want to cooperate with them. That's what it seems like to me. I don't know. But anyway, any other comments? Just because I say my opinion doesn't mean my opinion's the total of it or the right one. Okay, well, let's go on to verses 12 through 14.
And when Zebah and Zalmunna fled, he pursued after them, and took the 2 kings of Midian, Zebah and Zalmunna, and discomfited all the host. And Gideon the son of Joash returned from battle before the sun was up, and caught a young man of the men of Succoth, and inquired of him, and he described unto him the princes of Succoth, and the elders thereof, even 70 men.
Okay, Josie.
The 2 kings fled, but Gideon chased and captured them, routing their entire force. Later, Gideon returned by way of Hur's Pass. There he captured a young fellow from Succoth and demanded that he write down the names of all 77 political and religious leaders of the city.
Okay. And Zebah and Zalmunna fled, and he pursued them, and took the 2 kings of Midian, Zebah and Zalmunna, and terrified all the army. Then Gideon, son of Joash, returned from the battle by the ascent of Heres. And he caught a young man of Succoth, and inquired of him, and the youth wrote down for him the names of the officials of Succoth and its elders, 77 men. Any comments? Well, it is what it is, isn't it? Sounds like they're about to pay the price of their errors. All right. Let's go on ahead and read some more verses here. Let's do verses 15 through 17 and see what else happens.
And he came unto the men of Succoth, and said, Behold, Zebah and Zalmunna, with whom ye did upbraid me, saying, Are the hands of Zebah and Zalmunna now in thine hand? But we should give bread unto thy men that are weary. And he took the elders of the city, and thorns of the wilderness and briars, and with them he taught the men of Succoth. And he beat down the tower of Peniel, and slew the men of the city.
Okay, Josie.
He then returned to Succoth. You taunted me that I would never catch King Zebah and King Zalmunna, and you refused to give us food when we were tired and hungry. He said, Well, here they are. Then he took the leaders of the city and scraped them to death with wild thorns and briars. He also went to Peniel and knocked down the city tower and killed the entire male population.
Wow. And he came to the men of Succoth and said, Behold, Zebah and Zalmunna, about whom you scoffed at me, saying, Are Zebah and Zalmunna now in your hand, that we should give you bread to your men who are faint? And he took the elders of the city, and thorns of the wilderness, and briars, and with them he taught the men of Succoth a lesson. And he broke down the tower of Penuel, and slew the men of the city. Anything you got to say about that? Well, I know one thing. Gideon didn't speak words and then not follow through. He came back and he did what he said he was going to do to them. And he made sure that they regretted having not helped him and his army. So he did teach him a lesson, didn't he? Maybe several lessons. Well, unless we have more comments, let's go on ahead and read verses 18 through 21.
Then said he unto Zebah and Zalmunna, What manner of men were they whom ye slew at Tebar? And they answered in, As thou art, so were they. Each one resembled the children of a king. And he said, They were my brethren, even the sons of my mother. As the Lord liveth, if ye have saved them alive, I would not slay you. And he said unto Jether his firstborn, Up and slay them. But the youth drew not his sword, for he feared because he was yet a youth. Then Zebah and Zalmunna said, Rise thou, and fall upon us, for as the man is, so is his strength. And Gideon arose and slew Zebah and Zalmunna, and took away the ornaments that were around their camels' necks.
Okay, Josie.
Then Gideon asked King Zebah and King Zalmunna, the men you killed at Tebar, what were they like? They replied, They were dressed just like you, like sons of kings. They must have been my brothers, Gideon explained. I swear that if you hadn't killed them, I wouldn't kill you.
Yeah, verse 20 and 21 also.
Then turning to Jether, his oldest son, he instructed him to kill them. But the boy was only a lad and was afraid to. Then Zebah and Zalmunna said to Gideon, You do it. We'd rather be killed by a man. So Gideon killed them and took the ornaments from their camels' necks.
Okay. Then Gideon said to Zebah and Zalmunna, What kind of men were they whom you slew at Tabor? And they replied, They were like you. Each of them resembled the son of a king. And he said, They were my brothers, the sons of my mother. As the Lord lives, if you had saved them, I would not slay you. And Gideon said to Jether, his firstborn, to embarrass them, Up and slay them. But the youth drew not his sword, for he feared because he was yet a lad. Then Zebah and Zalmunna said, Rise yourself and fall on us. For as the man is, so is his strength. And Gideon arose and slew Zebah and Zalmunna, and took the crescent-shaped ornaments that were on their camels' necks. All right. Any comments?
Well, it sounds like they weren't doing the right thing there, and I guess all these other people are doing things on their own. I guess sounds like it.
Sounds like it.
And well, it sounds like a tragedy in the making there. And back then in the Old Testament, it's eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth.
Right. Wow. All right. That was a pretty good comment. I don't have anything to add to that. All right. Let's do verses 22 through 27.
Then the men of Israel said unto Gideon, Rule thou over us, both thou and thy son, and thy son's son also, for thou hast delivered us from the hand of Midian. And Gideon said unto them, I will not rule over you, neither shall my son rule over you. The Lord shall rule over you. And Gideon said unto them, I would desire a request of you, that you would give me every man the earnings of his prey. For they had golden earrings, because they were Ishmaelites. In verse 25, and they answered, We will willingly give them. And they spread a garment, and did cast therein every man the earrings of his prey. And the weight of the golden earrings that he requested was 1,700 shekels of gold, besides ornaments and collars and purple raiment that was on the kings of Midian, and beside the chains that were about their camels' necks. And Gideon made an ephod thereof, and put it in his city, even in Ophrah, and all Israel went thither, a-whoring after it, which thing became a snare unto Gideon and to his house.
Okay, Josie. Verses 22 through 27, please.
Now the men of Israel said to Gideon, Be our king. You and your sons and all your descendants shall be our rulers, for you have saved us from Midian. But Gideon replied, I will not be your king, nor shall my son. The Lord is your king. However, I have one request. Give me all the earrings collected from the fallen foes, for the troops of Midian, being Israelites, all wore gold earrings. Gladly they replied, and spread out a sheet for everyone to throw in the gold earrings he had gathered. Their value was estimated at 25,000, not including the crescents and pendants or the royal clothing of the kings or the chains around the camels' necks. Gideon made an ephod from the gold and put it in Ophrah, his hometown, but all Israel soon began worshiping it, so it became an evil deed that Gideon and his family did.
Okay. Then the men of Israel said to Gideon, Rule over us, you and your son's son also, for you have delivered us from the hand of Midian. And Gideon said to them, I will not rule over you, and my son will not rule over you. The Lord will rule over you. And Gideon said to them, Let me make a request of you. Every man of you give me the earrings of his spoil, for the Midianites had gold earrings, because they were Ishmaelites, general term for all descendants of Keturah. And they answered, We will willingly give them. And they spread a garment, and every man cast on it the earrings of his spoil. And the weight of the golden earrings was that he requested was 1,700 shekels of gold, beside the crescents and pendants and the purple garments worn by the kings of Midian, and the chains that were about their camels' necks. And Gideon made an ephod of a sacred high priest's garment of it, and put it in the city of Ophrah, and all Israel paid homage to it there, and it became a snare to Gideon and to his family. What comments do we come up with on these verses? Well, I, for one, thought that Gideon was on the right track for a while there when he refused to be the ruler and refused for his son to be the ruler, and he said, God will rule you. But then he turns around after saying that, and he asks for their jewelry and the spoils that they had so that he could make something and make a place for a thing that was similar to an idol to be worshipped. And it wasn't of God. And so this was the wrong thing to do. So he started off, headed the right direction, and then did about face and did this horrible deed. And that's what I got out of that.
It was sounds like it was almost like uh, yeah, building a monument of what he did or something, and for everybody else to reverence uh, this thing, and look what I did, and even
Mm.
himself, he did the same thing.
Yeah, that sounds kind of like what they did. 'Cause it wasn't exactly an idol, but yet at the same time, it wasn't of God. So, yeah, good comment. All right. Let's read verses 28 through 32.
Thus was Midian subdued before the children of Israel, so that they lifted up their heads no more. And the country was in, in quietness 40 years in the days of Gideon. And Jerubbaal, the son of Joaz, went and dwelt in his own house. And Gideon had 60 sons, and his body begotten, for he had many wives. And his concubine that was in Shechem, she also bare him a son, whose name he called Abimelech. And Gideon the son of Joaz died of a good old age, and was buried in the sepulchre of Joaz his father, or Ophrah of the Abiezrites. And it came,
Oh, you,
oh,
yeah, well, let's see. Yeah, go on ahead and read to 35 because we're almost there at the end.
and it came to pass, as soon as Gideon was dead, that the children of Israel turned again, and went a whoring after Baalim, and made Baal-berith their god. And the children of Israel remembered not the Lord their God, who had delivered them out of the hands of all their enemies on every side. Neither showed the kindness to the house of Jerubbaal, namely Gideon, according to all the goodness which he had showed unto Israel.
Okay. All right. Josie, will you read verses 28 to the end of the chapter, please?
That is a true account of how Midian was subdued by Israel. Midian never recovered, and the land was at peace for 40 years, all during Gideon's lifetime. He returned home and eventually had 70 sons, for he married many wives. He also had a concubine in Shechem or some, who presented him with a son named Amalek. Gideon finally died an old man and was buried in the sepulchre of his father Josh in Ophrah in the land of the Amalekites. But as soon as Gideon was dead, the Israels began to worship the idols of Baal and Baal Meredith. They no longer considered the Lord as their God, though he had rescued them from all their enemies on every side, nor did they show any kindness to the family of Gideon, despite all he had done for them.
Okay. Thus was Midian subdued before the Israelites, so that they lifted up their heads no more. And the land had peace and rest for 40 years in the days of Gideon. Jerubbaal, Gideon, son of Joash, went and dwelt in his own house. Now Gideon had 70 sons born to him, for he had many wives. And his concubine, who was in Shechem, also bore him a son, whom he named Abimelech. Gideon, son of Joash, died at a good old age, and was buried in the tomb of Joash his father in Ophrah of the Abiezrites. As soon as Gideon was dead, the Israelites turned again and played the harlot after the Baals, and made Baal-berith their god. And the Israelites did not remember the Lord their God, who had delivered them out of the hand of all their enemies on every side. Neither did they show kindness to the family of Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, in return for all the good which he had done for Israel. What are the comments y'all have?
Well, they seem to know how to forget God and continue with idols, or carry on with idols, and it's just like Moses. When he left Egypt, they weren't just all by themselves. They had other people with them that brought their idols with them, and it sounds like, who's ever ruling, the majority goes along with it. Meanwhile, there's other people who aren't going to be open about their idols. But as soon as the leader is dead, and another one comes along, here come the idols out of the closet, and it's yahoo, yeah, yippee. So it's so easy to influence the rest of them, unless they kind of leave and go to another country, those who don't agree with the idols. Who knows?
Any more comments, Josie? You have any? Or anything that sticks out to you? No? Well, I'm reminded of Proverbs 26:11, where it talks about the dog returning to his vomit. I mean, they get into trouble, they cry out to God, God rescues them, saves them, and helps them out. But it's not long after that they forget what God did, and they go against God again. And that, throughout the Old Testament, happens time and time and time again. And that has got to be that's got to make God very, very unhappy. I mean, it shows that their heart was not fully dedicated. They were just going with the flow. Each man it's like nowadays, each man needs to make up his mind. Are you going to serve God or not? Is God going to be first in your life or second in your life? Or, what are you? Each individual has to make up his mind whether he's going to serve God or not, and to what extent he's going to serve the Lord. And of course, the ideal is to serve God and God only, and put God first on everything, and to trust and obey him on everything. But as we see by the testimonies in scriptures, that's not the way it goes so many times. I mean, once in a while you find a strong leader who wants to serve God, and even he makes mistakes. Like Gideon, taking that jewelry and the spoils and making kind of a shrine to the occasion, and to sort of to himself. And that was not pleasing to God. But yet, telling them that God was going to be their leader, that was pleasing. That was good, but he didn't stick with that. And so it's just kind of interesting how we get on the right track, but it didn't take much to get us off onto the wrong track. Us meaning humanity. And time and time again, we have problems, and, like the dog who throws up, and he goes back to the throw up. Does the same thing he did before that caused him to throw up. So, they say a fool will do the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. And that's kind of what this is telling us too. when you say, I love you, Lord, I'm going to put you first, and then you don't put him first, you're not living up to what you spoke. It's that we've got to trust and obey God, but we've got to also realize that if we make a commitment to God, we need to stick to it and do things God's way. And he doesn't want us to be lukewarm. He wants us to be hot or cold. And he'd prefer that we be on the right track to serving. So anyway, that was sad, because not only did they disrespected God by doing that, but they also disrespected Gideon's family, because they weren't even grateful to Gideon for helping to lead them the way to victory, with God, directing his path. They didn't do right by him and his family either after he died. So there you have it. Humanity needs a lot of prayer. So anyways, any other comments?